All right, let's start in the AFC South. Tennessee Titans, a team you know quite well. Here's the burning question I had for the Titans, and you can speak to this in general terms and correct me if I'm wrong. You were in San Francisco when you guys drafted Trey Lance and Brock Purdy. You were in St. Louis/Los Angeles when you drafted Jared Goff. Is that true too?
Yep.
So, if you're the Tennessee Titans, you used the first overall pick to take Cam Ward. How do you avoid growing pains with any young rookie quarterback that's probably going to start in year one? We saw the success that Jaden Daniels had with Cliff Kingsbury last year. We didn't see the success with Caleb Williams early on in Chicago. We certainly saw it in Denver with Bo Nix and Sean Payton. So what are the parameters you're laying down in the weeks and months after the draft to make sure your young quarterback is set up for success?
I think it starts with being able to just surround them with weapons, right? And not put too much on them, because I was also in Atlanta when we drafted Matt Ryan, third overall, and the moves that were made that offseason was reassuring the offensive line and then going to get a player like Michael Turner, someone that he can turn and give the ball to take some of the pressure off, and then just putting them in advantageous situations, high percentage throws, and again, not putting too much on his plate too soon. And I think that'll be the way. And then you can merge some of what he's done at either Miami, Washington State, or Incarnate Word, some things that he's familiar with, some areas where he's comfortable, sprinkle some of that in to help, bridge him as he goes into this new offense.
Yeah, I mean, you drafted Peter Skoronski. You drafted J.C. Latham with first-round picks in back-to-back years, and I think those are the building blocks of an offensive line. They went out and got Dan Moore to play left tackle from the Steelers. Kevin Zeitler's on the roster. In terms of the skill position players, they signed veteran Tyler Lockett, who I feel like has been underrated his entire career, and then they drafted Kamari Dike, 4.3 speed out of the slot out of Florida, and then Alec Ayuminor, who's a sort of a big possession receiver, and then they have Tony Pollard, Tyjae Spears, and they drafted Khalil Mullings out of Michigan in terms of run support. So it feels like they're doing the things that you're talking about. I want to ask you about one more thing before we move on to the next AFC South team here in Jacksonville. You know Nick Holtz well, the offensive coordinator. What does he bring to the table? Like, what's his philosophy, and what can we expect? And you sort of touched on it a second ago with how he's going to ease Cam into being a rookie quarterback, probably starting week one.
Yeah, I think the cool thing that Nick does and how Nick goes about his business is he gives the quarterback input. Right. So you're not just forcing the QB to do what you want them to do and things that are uncomfortable for him. So he'll go to the quarterbacks. Hey, what do you like here? What do you like in this situation? What do you not like? And then is there something that you want to add? And so that gives them a voice in the process. So as they're going through these systems, going through the system and setting up the game plan, now the quarterback has a voice, and now you can't complain if things goes wrong, right? Because you've had a voice and you had the opportunity to tell the coaches what you like. So that's one of the cool things that Nick is able to do. I've been with some OCs where it's like it's my way or the highway, and you run what we call. But I like the fact that Nick, as a new age coach, gives the quarterback some say in the game plan.
I mean, you don't have inside knowledge on this, but just generally speaking, I was trying to figure out how things went wrong so quickly in Chicago. And I say that with the understanding that Caleb struggled, of course. Matt Eberflus, the head coach, ended up getting fired midway through the season. But how do you end up with an offensive coordinator that you have to move on from 6 weeks in? How does that happen? Like, how do you get to that point where in Washington, for example, you know who Cliff Kingsbury is, and you can roll with him because he's had a track record. Shane Waldron had a track record of some level of success in Seattle. How did things go wrong so quickly? Or was he just a scapegoat? I'm just trying to figure out how you get to that point with your young quarterback that you didn't think it through ahead of time.
Well, for me, having gone up against Shane, I was with Shane for a brief time with the Rams, and then having gone up against him from when I was in San Fran and he was in Seattle. It's, to me, the system, Shane's system didn't necessarily match Caleb's skill set. Right. Caleb is used to coming from a spread system, high percentage being in the gun, 3 and 4 wide looks, versus Shane's system was a lot of under center, a lot of 2 back looks, whether you're using a tight end or actual fullback or multiple backs. And so you force Caleb to do a lot of things, playing with his back to the defense, things that he hadn't traditionally done. And I think those were led to some early struggles.
That's great insight, because those are the things that fans and even folks in the media don't necessarily see, and they try to figure it out because on the surface it doesn't make sense, but you dig a little deeper, you understand what the thought process was, but they never quite got there. We'll see how things unfold for Cam. I feel like he's going to have a relative, not a smooth transition, but I feel like he has it in him to help turn that thing around in Tennessee. We'll find out for sure. All right, let's go to the Jaguars, a team that is still trying to figure it out. They've been some ups and downs with Trevor Lawrence, in part because of injury. They drafted T. Higgins, trade up from 5 to 2. We talked that draft trade to death at this point, and we'll see how it works out. But I love James Gladstone making that aggressive move as a year one GM. And your burning question, Rand, how long does it take before Travis Hunter is starting on both sides of the ball? And my follow-up would be, how long do you want it to take? Because I feel like we don't want to take a 185-pound superstar and make him play 85% of the snaps, which is what he did at Colorado.
So I'm looking at this kind of from a macro view, if you will, right? Like, we know what Travis's skill set is, and we've talked about it, and we've been talking about it for 3 years now, it feels like, with everything he's done from Jackson State to Colorado. However, if you are Jacksonville, you make this move for a reason, going from 5 to 2 to draft this guy, such a polarizing figure. But then also, if you're Jacksonville, you have to sell tickets. And because you're looking to expand the stadium, you're looking to, grow this franchise, and it's considered one of the lower market teams. So if you're Jacksonville, you have to do something to entice fans to come to the game. And people usually want to come and be a part of history and witness history. And so this is something that you could sell as like, hey, this guy will be the first player to start both ways in a game and allow fans to come and witness that and hopefully make that a normal thing, and they could sell out Everbank Stadium.
You know what? I was asked this the other day on HQ whether Travis legitimately has a chance to win Offensive and Defensive Rookie of the Year. And I said no, but the other part of that is he can win Offensive Rookie of the Year putting up like Malik Neighbors-like numbers. If he's just average on defense, he can win it there too. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. Let me ask you my burning question, see what you think about this. Mine was, can Travis Hunter be for Trevor Lawrence what T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, and Jordan Addison were for Cincinnati, Miami, and Minnesota? And by that I mean an elite number 2 that's almost a 1A and helps that offense get over the hump. Do you think he has that capability in year one with Brian Thomas Jr. coming off that fantastic rookie season?
Absolutely. And I say that because I'm looking at Liam Cohen's offense, and he's going to move Travis around. He's going to put Travis in positions to get Travis the ball and let Travis do what he do, which is go make plays. And so as he's learning the nuance of the offense, being able to adjust his routes to rotate in coverages, and once he's going to learn that over time, because that's something that he wasn't asked to do at Colorado. However, you're going to see them get him the ball quick, whether it's quick screens, bubble screens, quick slants, things that are going to get him in space to show his playmaking ability. And I think that's how they're going to use him. They're not going to ask him to necessarily route up these top corners out of the gate. He'll get there, but they're just going to find ways to get him the ball and allow him to go make plays. All
right. Are we all officially on the same page that Trevor Lawrence, we got to see some stuff this year? No more excuses?
Oh, yeah. The excuses are gone. They were gone last year. But he got hurt, you know what I mean? So when you're a guy that you're the first overall pick, you're highly paid, highly well compensated, now you have to lift the organization. That's just what it is. And especially with the rate in which you're paying quarterbacks now, at some point, whether you have the weapons or not, you have to lift the program around you. You have to put them on your shoulders. I hate to compare it because it's kind of comparing apples to oranges, but you go back and you look at what Cam Newton did in the offense he had at Auburn when he was at college. You probably can't name 3 players that were on that Auburn offense because Cam just put it all on his shoulders and led those guys to a national championship. And he kind of did the same thing in Carolina. Now, he had a strong backfield with D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart, and then he had Greg Olsen. But who were the weapons he was throwing to on the perimeter? Jericho Cotchery, those type of guys who weren't necessarily household names. Like Trevor Lawrence now has to put this Jacksonville Jaguars franchise on his back and carry them to where they want to go.
All right. I couldn't agree more. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about 2 other teams that are going to be battling the Jaguars for that top spot in the AFC South. And we'll talk about those guys, the Colts and the Texans, right after this. All right, Rand, let's continue our journey through the AFC South. And we are landing in Indianapolis, Indiana. Talking about the Colts here, and we turned in our burning questions separately to producer Stryker, and it turns out we had the same question essentially. I'll go with yours, and then I'll sprinkle in mine as we get through the conversation here. What's the plan for Anthony Richardson if he's beaten out by Daniel Jones? And that's a big problem. Former top 5 pick and former top 6 pick, as it were, battling out for the quarterback spot. I think Anthony Richardson's issues in the first 2 years was that maybe he wasn't taking the quarterback position and the job seriously enough. I think he's a good person and a solid young man, just, first time out of Florida, so on and so forth. And this is a big job responsibility. So I'll ask you, Rand, what are we doing if DJ beats out AR?
So the hard thing for anyone, especially having sat in the chair, is to admit a quote unquote mistake when you're drafting someone. And that's why I always give Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch credit when they drafted Trey Lance, number 3 overall, and then you still have Brock Purdy, who was the Mr. Irrelevant pick. And then once it was known that Brock Purdy was the guy, they were willing to move on and say, hey, it's time for us to cut ties with the number 3 overall pick, no matter what it cost us and no matter what you got back in return. So the real question is can Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen admit that if he's beaten out? And then also you have the follow-up to that is, because they're so different, do you now create packages for AR in that offense to give you just another weapon?
Right. And I'm doing the sort of calculus in my brain as you're talking about this. Whether it's the GM or the coach who notices first that maybe this isn't working, but you haven't yet had that conversation with the GM or coach, how does that go, Rand? So you're the GM, you're watching practice going, okay, and you're seeing the games, you're like, all right, do you bring this up to the coach or do you wait for the coach to bring it up to you? How do you address a situation that appears to be bubbling under the surface?
You have to be willing to have the tough conversation and have it immediately, because it's not just the coach and the GM that are having this conversation. Now it involves ownership, because you have at one point or another, you sold ownership on this pick. And so now you have to go and have this conversation with ownership and tell them why you feel this isn't the best decision for the team. And I think a decision has low key kind of been made already by signing Daniel Jones. It kind of puts you in the realm of where their thought process is right now. And you can say, hey, we're creating competition. You create competition with this guy with maybe a rookie quarterback, but you bring in a veteran who has something to prove. And then now you kind of already admitted that, hey, it may be time for us to move on.
All right. And look, nothing's been decided publicly. We'll find out together as we get through this thing. But if you're the GM and you're pulling Anthony Richardson to the side, what are you saying to him after you sign DJ and maybe he says, hey, what's this mean for me?
I'll just say this from our standpoint, from having, having been in the chair, the night we decided to draft Will Levis in the second round, our first phone call was to Ryan Tannehill. So we were upfront and we were honest out of the gate. Hey, look, we're signing a young quarterback. We don't know how this thing is going to go. Ryan was coming off of an offseason ankle surgery. And so we owe it to the organization to have a plan for the future if this doesn't work out. And so you put in that call to the player immediately and let him know, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is in the best interest of the team. And so if you will have every opportunity to be the starter and be the guy, you just got to go and earn it.
Right, and they drafted Riley Leonard, the Colts did, in the 5th round. You talk about giving a rookie quarterback an opportunity for some competition. That seems to point more towards AR keeping his job, but they did bring in DJ. They drafted Tyler Warren, who's going to be an asset for whoever the quarterback ends up being. But this feels like this is make it or break it time for Anthony Richardson. So hopefully he gets over that hump. Came out of Florida with only a handful of starts in the teens, and that was a big concern. But you and I were both at that pro day after being at the Will Levis pro day, the Bryce Young, and the C.J. Stroud pro day, and no one was more athletic than Anthony Richardson in person, and he looked the part. It's just a matter of being able to put it all together, and that's where we find ourselves here. And the only follow-up in terms of what I had in terms of the burning question, if AR doesn't figure it out, now we're going back to the well of drafting quarterbacks, and we'll have plenty of time over this summer to look at some quarterbacks. But because I have nothing better to do, I've already watched a handful of these guys. I don't know. We talked about this last week on the podcast, Rand. I don't know if Arch Manning's coming out. History says he's not. I don't know if Nico Iamaleava is the guy that you want to put all the eggs in that basket because of the uncertainty in terms of his development and changing schools and all that. Quarterback class looks okay. Doesn't look great. So is that a conversation you're having as well when you talk to the coach and the ownership about our plans going forward after a potentially a post Anthony Richardson / Daniel Jones world?
100%. And now you have nothing but time to get an early jump on watching these quarterbacks, right? Because no more games are going to be played until late August anyway. And so now you have nothing but time to sit back and go and watch, this previous year's tape, 2024 tape, 2023 tape, if you will. But how about if Arch Manning does come out and for some strange reason he ends up in Indy? Like, how crazy would that be? Yet another Manning in Indianapolis.
I mean, that's not a bad stretch. Peyton, Andrew Luck, and then Arch. And that's when you're living right. All right, let's go to Houston, a team that has moved on from Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator. They have not moved on from C.J. Stroud. That certainly would be news. Your burning question, and they loaded up the wide receiver room in the draft. With a crowded wide receiver room, how many of these wide receivers do they plan to carry on the roster this season? And just a quick reminder, they drafted Jaden Higgins and his teammate Jalen Noel out of Iowa State. They signed Christian Kirk. They signed Justin Watson, who was sort of an under-the-radar wide receiver 4 in Kansas City. They have Xavier Hutchinson previously from Iowa State. Tank Dell may not play this year. We don't know about that yet. And, of course, they have John Mechie, their former day 2 pick out of Alabama a few years ago. All right, what do you got, Rand?
So let's remove Tank Dell and say that at minimum, he's starting the year on a PUP. You still have 11 receivers on this roster that are capable of making your team. So now do you carry 6? Do you carry 7? And then from there, where do you go light? Now, the one thing I will say that Nick Caserio has done a really good job of, he has done a really good job from a transaction standpoint, whether it's moving up and down the draft board to gain other picks. I mean, look at how they acquired Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk was on his way to be cut, and then they give their division rival a 7th-round pick to ensure that they get him. And so I could see this being a situation where at roster cut down, because one of the positions that everyone's looking for at roster cut down, you're looking for tackles, you're looking for receivers, you're looking for corners, and you're looking for linebackers. And I could see this being a situation where one of these guys, to avoid them being claimed, that they acquire a 6th or 7th round pick, for these guys to kind of stockpile for next season.
I also was talking to someone close to the team, and they mentioned that Xavier Hutchinson may have a better chance of making the final roster, or being on the final roster at least, than John Mechie, because Xavier excels on special teams. And that's something that fans and even media don't necessarily pay attention to when you're building a roster. You got to be able to play special teams if you're wide receiver 3 or 4, right?
Yeah, I would say wide receiver 4 or 5, because the third receiver plays such a vital role now. And it's almost like another starter, because so many teams play 11 personnel. But you mentioned Hutchinson, but Braxton Berrios, who's been a Pro Bowl returner, you have him now. And so is he wide receiver 5 because of his return ability? So John Mechie, and Mechie can play multiple positions. I'm sure in that offense, he knows the X, the Z, and the F, but now he's going to have to excel somewhere else to carve out a role for himself. So he could be prime candidate. I know he was very well thought of coming out of Alabama. He could be a guy that's a prime trade target.
Exactly. So those are the things we have to look forward to as we get closer to August and training camp, and then, of course, the regular season. My burning question was, Houston has the skill position players. We just talked about them. Will the offensive line hold up? Currently, they have Titus Howard at left tackle, Jared Patterson and Juice Scruggs across the interior offensive line, Blake Fisher at right tackle. So, Titus Howard's the left guard. They have Cam Robinson replacing the left tackle they moved on from. So there's some stuff to sort out there. They do have Trent Brown and Ed Ingram as well, players that veterans they've added to the roster. So that's going to be the big question. Offensively, in terms of the skill position players, they're going to have an opportunity to be lights out. They just got to protect C.J. Stroud much better than they did last year. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, taking our attention to the AFC North, and we'll start with a team that currently has 5 quarterbacks on the roster, including 2 that they drafted, the Cleveland Browns. We'll talk about them right after this. All right, Rand, we have made our way through the AFC South. Now we're turning our attention to burning questions for the AFC North. First up, the Cleveland Browns, a team that started off pretty strong on draft weekend. Traded down from 2 to 5, got an extra first-round pick from the Jaguars. Things seem to be falling into place. They got Mason Graham. They got Carson Schlesinger at the top of the second round. They drafted some running backs. Quinshon Judkins was the first one to go. Then Sampson out of Tennessee. Then they took 2 quarterbacks. But one thing they didn't take position-wise was a wide receiver, and we'd identified that as a huge need for weeks and probably months. So I'll ask you, whoever the quarterback ends up being, from Joe Flacco to Kenny Pickett to Dillon to Shador, how are you going to fix the wide receiver position? Because these rookie quarterbacks potentially were thrown to better quarterbacks in college their final year than outside of Jerry Jeudy in terms of guys being able to get open consistently in the NFL. So what's the thinking process here?
This is one where you're going to have to, continue to monitor what's available to you on the street. There are going to be some, solid receivers here, veteran receivers that are available to you on the street. I actually went back the last couple of nights and just kind of looked at all the players that are available on the street. And it's actually a pretty good list. So you can still find some help there. And as we just talked about in the previous segment, maybe Andrew Berry wants to call Nick Caserio and trade for one of those, receivers that they have there. But you have to find Jerry Jeudy some help. I think Jerry Jeudy led the team with over 90 catches last year. And I think the next best leading wide receiver in the room may have had 29 catches. So that's just a huge disparity there in the room. And you have to find a way to fix it. You signed Deontay Johnson, which, Deontay, from being a former Steeler, he is a good player. However, I question, can you trust him just based off of how his last 2 stops in Carolina and Baltimore and how those things turned out? Can you trust him to be a guy to help that room? So I don't know that. I think there's still a lot of questions there for the wide receiver position.
Yep, Jerry Jeudy obviously is who he is. Seth Tillman and Jamari Thrash are currently listed as the starters. They do have David Bell, who they drafted a few years ago out of Purdue. And, of course, they have David Njoku in the last year of his deal. They did draft Harold Fana Jr., who you can just use essentially in the slot if you want to as a move tight end, but he's not going to threaten anyone down the field consistently, even though he's a big body target. And the Deontay Johnson thing I'll mention, they signed him to, I think, a 1-year deal. No guaranteed money. So that screams to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong as a former GM, that we're not trusting you until you show us that you can be trusted type situation.
100%. And the fact that the deal has no guarantees. Now, again, he's a veteran, so if he's on the roster week 1, then his salary becomes fully guaranteed.
Okay.
So, but again, and I actually like the fact that they structured the deal that way. Your money becomes guaranteed when you make this team. So therefore, you have to make this team. So now he has that proverbial carrot in front of him that he has to get to.
And the thing is, he's not even 30 years old, and he's an incredible route runner when he's locked in. And just getting him locked in is the big issue. My burning question, which is potentially the most predictable burning question ever asked, in football or otherwise, who is QB1 and QB2 and QB3 in Cleveland? Because we know currently Deshaun Watson probably won't play. He may never play again in Cleveland, but they do have Joe Flacco, who they signed. They traded for Kenny Pickett, the 2 veterans on the roster. Then they drafted Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round, and then 2 rounds later they took Shedeur Sanders. We were at that pro day, or showcase as it was called. So we'll find out together, but it sounds like Shedeur's doing and saying all the right things. He's in Cleveland. He's got himself a gym. He's got in the playbook, I believe. And then all you can do is do what's in front of you in terms of mini camps. And as a GM, what are you looking for in mini camps from the rookie quarterbacks in particular? In this case, there'll be 2 in Dillon and Shedeur that Andrew Berry will be watching closely.
You're just looking to see how well they're picking up the offense, what type of command they have, and then how are they running the huddle. And those are the things that you're typically looking at. Now, you get to see the real test when the veterans are out there and how they move and how they go about their business, once the veterans are in the building. Because right now in rookie minicamp, you have 20 to 30 some guys that none of them really know what they're doing. And so it could be a little bit of a cluster sometimes, but you just want to see out of these 2 positions, particularly these 2 guys that have the experience they have, is what type of command they have and how well are they picking up the offense.
All right. Yeah, we'll find out. It'll be fun, certainly, to see how it unfolds. And all right, who's the week 1 starter in Cleveland?
I would just hedge my bet and say Joe Flacco.
I think that's right.
Just because of familiarity and having been there, him having been in the system already, he has a step ahead. So I would say Joe Flacco for week 1.
Week 12.
Ooh. Week 12, I'll say Shador by week 12.
Okay. All right. You had to think about it, but it's going to be interesting. Say what you want about the Browns. They are not boring. Next up, another team that's not boring, the Cincinnati Bengals. They will drop a 50 burger on you and still find a way to lose 9 football games. We'll see if that's changed, and that gets to your burning question. I actually essentially asked the same question, but the other side of the coin. Your burning question, is the offense going to be enough to carry the entire team, which is a direct slap in the face to the defense? My burning question was, did they do enough to help their defense this offseason? So we're asking the same question, coming at it from different perspectives. Al Golden is now the defensive coordinator, and I'll just go with your question first. Is that offense, as high-powered as it is, going to be enough to sustain their ability to win football games in the AFC North?
Well, one thing about it, they have the weapons that'll score points. Now, the burning question, an additional burning question will be, can they finish with the ball last? Right? Because if they can finish with the ball last, it gives them a chance to. I think that this offense is potent enough to be able to score on anybody. But again, this defense, and we're talking about the AFC North, which is known for defense, right? So this is why Zach goes out. He lets go of Lou Anarumo, who's really been a really good coordinator. And, he was a hot candidate for head coaching jobs. And then you go get Al Golden, who has a multiplicity level to his defenses and all the different things that he can do. But you still need to have players. You still need to have guys that can go out and execute that. And I'm just not quite sure that they're there at this time. Now, you go and you draft Shamar from Texas A&M to play opposite of Trey Hendrickson. However, you still have to figure out Trey Hendrickson and if he's going to be there long term. So I think the defense still leaves a ton more questions. However, the offense, do I think is going to be enough to carry the whole team? I'll say no. Because of how they're going to have to play. And again, we're talking AFC North. And when that weather takes a factor, you're not going to be able to play Golden State Warriors football and just throw it all up and down the yard.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't want to put Joe Burrow in a situation where every single week he's taking 50 hits to try to get the game close at the end, because the defense struggled early on in that game to put them behind the 8 ball. And look, we've talked about this draft. This wasn't a draft that I loved. It could end up being great. We don't know. But in real time, it's one I had questions with. I do like the Dylan Fairchild pick. Interior offensive line, he'll probably be a day one starter. But let's go back to Trey Hendrickson, because he's made it happy 2 off seasons in a row that he wants more money or he wants to be traded. If you're the GM, well, the GM has to answer to the owner, but I would imagine Duke Tobin would love to keep him around. But age 30, he's still incredibly productive. He's still a top 10 edge rusher in my mind. Do you just pay him on a 2-year deal, or are you saying, well, I don't know if you're going to be productive in year 30, 31 as you have been previously, so we'll just roll the dice and somehow this defense will get less effective as a pass rushing unit?
I think you have to look at paying him, right? Because you don't know what Shamar Stewart is going to be. You don't know. I think that's one of the biggest, anomalies in this draft. No one talks bad about his athleticism and just his natural God-given ability. But he did not produce at Texas A&M. You have to call a spade a spade. And now you spend a first-round pick on him, and then you have a proven commodity that you may not want to pay. So I think there are some other reasons as to why Cincinnati has probably been slow to pay him that we're not privy to, because we're not in the building with Trey Hendrickson on a day-to-day basis. However, if you're just keeping it on the field, I think he's earned the right to have some sort of extension done or some sort of guaranteeing his salary this year if that's what he wants. But you have to find a way to keep him, because you're not going to find a better player at this point on the street, because either you're going to have to pay another guy in free agency who hadn't been in your building probably more than what you were going to pay Trey Hendrickson, or you're going to have to roll the dice and take another guy in the draft.
Exactly. And as a Steelers fan, I said it all the time, Trey Hendrickson might have been the best player on the planet every time he played the Steelers, because he was lighting them up snap after snap after snap. Now, best case scenario, you get Trey Hendrickson back, Miles Murphy finally hits, and then Shamar Stewart hits, then you're winning the Super Bowl. If you get all those 3 guys playing like we know they can play, that's a Super Bowl team. I think that's fair to say. All right, let's take a quick break here, and we'll come back, and we'll get to God's team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, talk about their burning questions right after this. All right, Rand, the old burning questions mobile is headed to Pittsburgh, and I love your burning question. And I'll just say this. We talked last segment about Trey Hendrickson being 30 years old. He'll turn 31 this December. TJ Watt's 3 months older than he is, He'll turn 31 in October. And your question is this: will they pay TJ Watt, who is still one of the best, probably top 3 edge rushers in the AFC, top 5 maybe in the NFL? Will the Steelers pay him? Because for as much as we talk about their defensive line, they don't have a lot of depth after TJ Watt. They have Alex Highsmith. They have Nate Herbig as a situational pass rusher. But after that, it's wide open. So will they pay TJ Watt, the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I'll say it this way. If they don't, someone else will. So right. in short, pay the man. Just pay him, because he is what you think of when you think of the Pittsburgh Steelers in this era of Pittsburgh Steelers football. Like, he is an absolute dog. And when you talk about needing a play to end a game, to end a drive, you know that Trent Jordan Watt is going to go make that play for you. And so I say pay him. It makes too much sense not to. So in these words, if Omar's listening, if Mr. Rooney's listening, if Mike T is listening, pay the man.
Yeah, my mantra, in addition to your mantra of stay in your own lane, is don't overthink it. Like, you know who TJ Watt is. The funny thing about TJ Watt, and I'll ask you, I don't know if you remember this off the top of your head, but one of the reasons he slipped in the draft to the bottom of the first round is because he was considered quote unquote stiff in terms of as an edge rusher. I think we all got that one wrong. And it also just goes to show that it doesn't matter where you started, sort of where you finished. How do we miss that one so badly?
In your words, we overthought it.
Yeah.
Simple and clear. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think he was in the same draft as Myles Garrett. And so we're looking at a guy that was the number 1 pick, who's this freakish athlete, looked like a bodybuilder, type guy that could do all the athletic things. And then you look on the other side and you see TJ, and, he's still well built, but there was some stiffness and some tightness there. And everybody, we all overthought it because thinking that he has to look like Myles Garrett. And I think TJ's proven all of us wrong, except the Steelers.
Yeah, and the other thing is, and we sort of talk about this with Arch Manning, and we talked about it with Drake May a little bit in terms of having the family background of playing high-level sports and being competitive. J.J. Watt was staring us right in the face, so we sort of knew what that might look like in terms of competitiveness level. And TJ, you could argue, is just as, if not more, competitive than his brother, it feels like. But either way, I'm with you. You got to pay him for the Steelers. My burning question, again, couldn't have been more obvious, is what are you doing waiting for Aaron Rodgers? Or are you thinking about seriously turning your attention towards Kirk Cousins while you figure out the quarterback situation?
Again, that is the hot topic. And to me, regardless of where you go with Aaron Rodgers, you still have to have a plan for the future, because you're going to be right back down this road next year trying to answer this question, even if you go with Kirk Cousins. Because now if you go with Kirk Cousins, you're giving up a draft choice, whatever level that is, 4th, 5th, 6th, conditional 7th, whatever the case may be, but you still have to pay Kirk Cousins, right? So even if you get the Atlanta Falcons to pay half of the salary, you're still looking at paying this guy $20+ million for this year, which is double of what Aaron Rodgers is saying he's willing to take. So you're still putting yourself in a situation where there are going to be more burning questions like this come January and February.
All right, who gives the Steelers the best chance to win in 2025? Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Will Howard, Mason Rudolph? If you had to pick one guy, who are you rolling with?
If I had to pick one guy, you got to go with Aaron Rodgers. And I'll just say simply, the guy's won. The guy's won a Super Bowl. Even though that was 2010, he's won a Super Bowl. Kirk Cousins has never been there, and these young guys have never been there. So he still gives you the best chance to win. Simply put, I'll answer it that way. Aaron Rodgers gives you the best chance to win.
I'm with you. And look, man, you'll put up with a lot of off-field stuff if the on-field stuff is on point. And I think Steelers fans have not resigned themselves, but they've accepted that fact, and they just want it to be over. But I think Aaron Rodgers works at his own pace, so we'll find out when he lets us know. In the meantime, let's turn our attention to the Baltimore Ravens. And your burning question is an important one. They absolutely crushed this draft. One of our favorite drafts. We've talked about it in previous weeks. And you can check that out on the old podcast feed if you're so inclined. But it is hard to argue what they did in terms of making their football team better. Your burning question is one that I would imagine that was at the forefront of what they informed their decisions during the draft. Is this an all-in year for the Ravens? Another way, my words of putting it is this finally the year they get over the hump that is the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, I still need to see this team, how it's going to be constructed when it's finally put together. Now, conventional wisdom, you look at the names, you see the people that they brought in this offseason. And let's not even count the draft class yet. Let's just talk about what they've done in free agency, guys and veterans that they've brought in, which has kind of been the Baltimore Raven MO. But you have to be realistic and ask yourself, how much do these guys still have left in the tank? Right. And so, again, it leads you to more questions. Can Lamar put this team on his back and carry him? Does he still need help? Where is Lamar at? Is Lamar now on the other side of his greatness? We don't know. However, I think this has to be an all-in year for them, because at some point that window of opportunity closes. And you look at where San Francisco had been in previous years. They had a nice little runway there where they had a nice open window, but then that window started to close and then forced them to make decisions on letting people go. And I think this is the year that the window starts to close for Baltimore.
The other thing compounding this is that the Chiefs crushed their draft too. So it almost like the old rising tides lifts all boats situation where, yeah, the Ravens did it better than almost anyone. The almost part is that the Chiefs are in that conversation along with the Eagles on the other side of the conference there. So I get it.
And Buffalo as well, because Buffalo was, if I'm not mistaken, that was one of I think that was your most favorite draft. And so the competition around Baltimore is getting better while Baltimore is still figuring out how they're going to get over the hump.
And realistically, in the playoffs, the issue wasn't the personnel. It's that Lamar actually had one of his worst games. So that has nothing to do with, on some level, the guys running routes or the guys blocking for you, because everything else felt pretty much the same. That said, it's hard to argue with what Eric DeCosta has done in terms of putting even together a better roster. And the one question I had, are the wide receivers good enough? Because they have Dre Hopkins, and I think that's maybe one of the players you're talking about in terms of the ones they signed that isn't going to be the Dre Hopkins from 8 or 9 years ago. They have Rashad Bateman, who's a solid number 2. Zay Flowers is a number 1, but sometimes struggles with inconsistency. Last year they drafted Tez Watkins, the burner straight line speed guy to UNC. Didn't play a whole lot last year. They got LaJohntay Wester this year. And, of course, the backfield is Derrick Henry and Justice Hill. And Keaton Mitchell, the burner from ECU, who tore his ACL about a year and a half ago, who came back late last year. So are the weapons good enough? They're better, it feels like, than the Browns' weapons, but this team is in a different place than the Browns. Do you think the offensive firepower is enough, especially given the conversations around perhaps moving on from Mark Andrews?
I love the backfield. I love having Derrick Henry and Lamar back there, and I love that. I love that dynamic. I've always been a huge Zay Flowers fan and what he can do, especially for a guy of his size. Bateman kind of came on, in the past, last season comparative to where he had been. And then D-Hop, I think, will be 33 years old. So I think he's on the other end. And I think for a guy like D-Hop, he's chasing a ring and he wants to be a part of a championship winning team, which is why he would sign here. But I still don't know that they have the weapons on the perimeter that's going to be able to balance it out, especially if Zay Flowers continues to be in and out of the lineup with injuries.
Right. So those are the things we got to figure out. But on paper, man, this team looks better than it did last year, and that's saying a whole bunch. But so do the Bills, and so does the Chiefs. So we'll find out. Got plenty of time for that. We're going to start with the old New England Patriots. And again, as usual, we submitted our burning questions to producer Stryker. We didn't see them until now, and I'm actually excited to see what you have here. Your burning question, and I'll actually pair it with mine and we'll answer it together here. You asked, do the Patriots have enough weapons to help Drake May avoid the sophomore slump? And my follow-up to that is, usually we say a team is a year away when we look at what they've done after free agency in the draft. Are the Patriots primed to have a a winning record and maybe even have a wild card conversation in their future? Because you know Mike Vrabel very well. That culture appears to have changed overnight. So let's start with the Drake May sophomore slump question. How do we avoid that? And then we'll follow it up with, is this team going to be better than perhaps we even think they might be?
Well, to start there, my big question coming into this draft was, do they have the weapons at wide receiver? And, you look at their wide receiver group, and they have about 8 guys or so that are going to compete for the top 5 to 6 slots. And then I know they're excited about the addition of Kyle Williams, and so that should be able to help them. But then last year, Hunter Henry led them, their starting tight end led them in receptions and yards, right? And so you're going to need a little bit more production out of that receiver room. And then if you look at it, Demario Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, and Jalen Polk all average less than 11 yards per catch. And so you'd like to see more production out of that group, and I think that is what will help Drake May avoid the sophomore slump.
Yeah, so we've talked about Kyle Williams' role as a 5'11" X-receiver playing outside at Washington State and what his role is going to be at the next level. Is he big enough to play outside? And he certainly could be. They have Stephon Diggs. They gave him a lot of money. We'll see how he is after coming back from that ACL injury that cut short his season last year for Houston. But on the other side of the ball, Rand, they signed Milton Williams. They acquired Harold Landry III, who you're quite familiar with. They have Carlton Davis. This team, and they drafted Will Campbell on offense, but in terms of the defense, this feels like a unit under Mike Vrabel that maybe gets to 7 wins, and then you can luck your way into 2 more wins, and then if you're 9-8, you have a chance to be a wild card team. Am I a year too early on that? Because I feel pretty good about this team just looking at them on paper.
No, you're not a year early. I don't think so at all. And I just know how Vrabel is and how he's going to go through and reset that culture there and establish the culture that he's used to having in New England from his time playing there and the championships that he's won. And so he has a unique way about him in terms of getting the best out of players. And I can already tell you in what they're doing right now in the offseason program, he's out there coaching every position, which you expect from him. He's so knowledgeable and has savant-like level mind frame when it comes to playing and coaching the game of football. So I think this could be a team that's going to surprise some people in the AFC because now he has something that he hadn't had in a very long time, which is stability at the starting quarterback position. Oh, and by the way, you have Josh McDaniels back now as the offensive coordinator. So I expect him to be a little more hands-off on the offensive side of the ball than he has been in the past.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. Sometimes it feels like coaches are better suited to be coordinators and head coaches, and Josh McDaniels appears to fit in that mold, and if so, that's great news for Drake May. The schedule has not officially come out, but we know who the teams are going to be that each team is going to face, and I'm just looking at the schedule of the Patriots, and I don't feel terrible about it. I think this could be a sneaky good team. At home, they're going to play the Carolina Panthers, the Browns. They'll play, of course, the Dolphins and the Jets. They have the Giants at home. You can see that here. And then the Raiders. Man, you can find 5 wins, maybe 6 if things go the way they want them to go. And then once they get on the road, you see those away games there, Ravens, Bengals, Saints, Bucks, Titans, and that's where things get interesting. But I'll just reiterate, I think this team could find their way to 7 wins and then luck their way into 2 or 3 more wins even, and then we're having a conversation where, this is the Patriots team we're used to seeing, just new faces with Mike Vrabel and Drake May at quarterback. All right, let's go down the road here. Down 95 a bit to New York, New Jersey specifically. We start with the Jets here. Your burning question, and I'll pair it with mine because they go hand in hand. You ask, can Justin Fields get it done as the Jets starting quarterback? They signed him to a 2-year deal, so it sounds like the Jets aren't even sure if that's going to happen. And then my burning question is, what's the plan at wide receiver after Garrett Wilson? A question Garrett Wilson's been asking for a couple years now. All right, Rand, is Justin Fields the guy, and how can he be the guy in New York?
Well, I'll just start with we'll see. Because so far in his career, he's only been to the playoffs once, and that was as a backup last year in Pittsburgh, where he's only seen 2 snaps. And so, to tie into your question, they still have to surround him with more weapons to make him right as a quarterback and to put him in, in winning positions to take care of the football and just take advantage of his overall skill set. So I think if you manage him properly and allow him to run the ball some and mix it up, kind of how Greg Roman has used Lamar Jackson down in Baltimore, just being able to take full advantage of his skill set and not put too much on his plate. I think that will help them, get to, creep to that 5, 6 to 7, win mark, which is something they hadn't seen in a long time. And that from there, I think is where you start.
Yeah, so they drafted Armand Mimbu, the right tackle. The offensive line, if healthy, should be in the best shape it's been in a long time. And that's the starting point for any quarterback, young or old, running quarterback or pocket passer. They drafted Mason Taylor, the tight end out of LSU, Jason Taylor's son. So that's going to give Justin Fields some short and intermediate help in the middle of the field and maybe take some of the pressure off Garrett Wilson, who's been begging for a number 2 for what feels like forever. Didn't work out last year with Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers, of course. They did sign Josh Reynolds. They did sign veteran journeyman Tyler Johnson out of Minnesota from a few years back, and they drafted Arian Smith, the burner out of Georgia, who struggles with drops, and that's just the reality of it. Defensively, you would expect Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilkes to get that team back to where they've been previously. I'm not so much concerned about that, but I think it's fair to say that offensively, the Patriots feel like they're a good ways ahead of the Jets, or is it closer than that?
No, I feel better about the Patriots, and I think if you're looking at it objectively, the Jets could be knocking on the door of being, that fourth team in the division again. But again, it depends on how they use Justin Fields, how well they take advantage of his skill set, and if he's able to put the team on his back and carry them through. And like you said, like it is any given Sunday. Those matchups and the way the league is, this league is about building parity, and I think it's pretty good parity across the league. And so he can put the team on his back and steal 2 or 3 wins somewhere at some point in their schedule.
Before we take a break here, let me ask you this. If you've been in the league 4 or 5 years now, as Justin Fields has been, and you struggle at layering the ball to the second level and throwing with anticipation, that's not going to change? Or is it going to change? And if it's not going to change, how do you build an offense around it?
I think it could get slightly better. I don't think it'll change because to me that's instinctual. And again, that's why I kept leaning on taking advantage of his ability to run. And so mixing some of that in and not putting everything on him to be a pure throwing quarterback. Just take advantage of his skill set and use it. And you have 2 years to use it. So why not just run it into the ground and then make a decision from there whether you want to extend or move on?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And I would imagine the Jets understand that for sure. They just got to build that offense around Justin. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll hit the second half of the AFC East, the Dolphins and the Bills. Bills had my favorite draft of all the teams in this draft, so we'll talk about that and Miami and what they need to do to get better right after this. All right, Rand, let's take the burning question mobile down to South Florida, specifically the Miami Dolphins. We just talked about the Patriots and the Jets. Your burning question, again, goes hand in hand with mine. We didn't see each other's till just now. I'll start with mine, and then we'll end with yours and go from there. I wrote, if the offensive line holds up, Miami is in the playoff chase. I think their offensive line is sneaky, has a chance to be pretty good. And we know when Tua's healthy, he can be clinical in terms of dialing up plays and carving up defenses. So Miami's in the playoff chase, but how do they replace Jalen Ramsey? Your question was, when will they get the Jalen Ramsey trade done? And Jalen Ramsey obviously doesn't want to be there, or it sounds like they're going to move on from him at the very least. And if you're without Jalen Ramsey, is that offense, if healthy, good enough to overcome the loss of one of the best cornerbacks in the league over the last decade?
Yeah, I think you can mask it. And I think you're able to mask it just by all the different things you're able to do, up front. And then they're gonna have the pass rushers to be able to apply pressure. And so, as long as you can get home on the quarterback and force them to make quick throws, then you'll be better off, just in terms of just coverage. But again, going to my burning question is, when is this deal going to get done? We've heard about the deal. Something that they were working on prior to the draft. You thought it would possibly get done during the draft so you can exchange some draft picks, but now it hadn't been done. And so you look at the teams who need corners probably still at this point, the Rams, the Raiders, the Vikings. And you have to take into account Jalen Ramsey's age and then his contract number. He's carrying a cap hit this year of 16.6, and then you see that number balloon to 25 and some change in 2026. And so I'm pretty sure that's the sticking point right now. It's what's going to come next. Is it going to be a reworking of the contract, or is he looking for a new contract to get more guaranteed as he gets older?
So when you're GM, either trying to make the trade or trying to get the player in the trade, how much are you willing to? How much? I know it varies player to player, but how much of this Jalen Ramsey contract are you willing to eat if you're Dolphins GM Chris Greer just to move on and get a fresh start?
I think it totally depends on the compensation that you're going to get back. And if you're going to be able to get a higher round pick, then you might, you might take some of that salary on and carry some of it if it's a higher round pick. But then if you're on the other side, if you're the other team, you have to look at it as, are we just a Jalen Ramsey away from competing? And so you look at those type teams and they may take on the full salary just for the year. But if you're a Raiders type team, are you a Jalen Ramsey away from competing? Probably not. So at that point, you're going to ask for permission to have a conversation, to talk to him, to see what he's looking for in terms of contract compensation. And if that's out of your realm, then you just move on and cut your losses.
And I believe the Rams traded a first-round pick a few years ago for Jalen Ramsey, and there was some hand-wringing about that, and then they went on and won the Super Bowl. So it just depends. The Rams maybe didn't feel like they were a player away at the time. Turns out they were a player away, and they very well could be a player away right now. It's so hard to tell what that division is going to look like. So a reunion there wouldn't be the craziest thing, I don't think.
No, not at all. And then you mix in their defensive backs coach, Aubrey Pleasant, who's very well thought of around the league, and he can handle guys like Jalen Ramsey. Now would be a good time for them to do that because they have the structure in place to handle Jalen.
Are you of the opinion, when I ask my burning question, that if the offensive line holds up, that this team has a chance to be a playoff team? You believe that, or are you still have concerns about Tua's health and even the offensive line post-Teron Armstead?
No, I think I agree with you on the offensive line, but my concern is going to always be Tua's health. Is can Tua stay healthy? I think the offensive line is going to do their part. I think the backs are going to do their part. But like you said, if Tua's upright and he can keep himself healthy, and with Mike McDaniel's offense and the way they run it and his skill set, they'll be a playoff team. But Tua has to stay healthy.
Yeah, worth noting they signed Zach Wilson to a one-year deal. It's always good to know who the backup is there, and they drafted Quinn Ewers in the 7th round, which is a story that still boggles the mind given where Quinn Ewers was a few years ago. All right, let's head up to Western New York, the old Buffalo Bills. The best team in New York, and it's not even close. They're the only team in New York. That helps their cause there. But let's talk about this. We talked about the last few weeks. This is my favorite draft class. I know you like their draft class a lot. And I know that GM Brandon Beane was pushing back on some of the media and fans' reaction to their draft. I don't know what fans were upset about, but here we are. Your big burning question for the Bills: is this the year the Bills get over the hump in the AFC? Their first 5 picks were on defense. Their second 5th round pick was a blocking tight end. So it feels like Josh Allen is going to have to carry the load. He's capable of doing that, and the defense now feels like it's the best it's been in a while. Is that enough to scare off the ghost of the Kansas City Chiefs?
I'm sure they sure as hell hope so. Like you said, they've spent a lot of resources. We talked about what they've done in the draft and how they spent those resources on defense. Then you sign a Joey Bosa to defense. Then you extend Khalil Shakir, you have Shakir, where you extended him. Then you extend Bernard, and you extend Benford on defense. And so you have all these guys that you're paying. And so now defense should be taken care of that way. And then now you come back with what Josh Allen is going to have to do. And I think they're set to turn the tide, because, and we'll get to later, I'll tell you my thoughts on Kansas City moving forward.
Typically, we have these conversations in the division about how you build your roster to beat the teams you have to face the most often. What do the Bills need to do? Like, what is their game plan, Rand, to combat what the Chiefs seem to do to them every January? Is that strictly getting after Patrick Mahomes, or is that something else? Because obviously they went defense. Does that feel like the right direction to go, and solely to win that one game that you have yet to win?
Yeah, I think the Eagles gave everyone the blueprint. You got to be able to rush for, and you got to be able to play coverage behind it. And I think if you look at what Buffalo has done, I think they're building that. And I think that's what they're working towards, and being able to play coverage behind the rush of four guys, being able to get pressure on Patrick Mahomes. And again, that blueprint works, and it has worked. And so I think once Buffalo has seen that, and now you have a full offseason to plan for it, I expect them to be better against the Chiefs moving forward.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Chiefs had their struggles with the Eagles, and then 4 years prior, they had their struggle with the Bucs, who just teed off on Patrick Mahomes in that Super Bowl, the one that Tom Brady won there. My burning question was biggest hole is explosive wide receiver, but they've checked every other box for free agency in the draft. So to follow up on your point, no more excuses here. Are you okay with Keon Coleman as your 1A with Josh Palmer and Khalil Shakir, as Shakir will be your 2, and I guess Josh will be your 3?
Yeah, I'm good with it, just because I feel like their new offense isn't designed to feed one person the football. It's to spread it around. And I think Josh is better when he can just throw the ball to the open man, as opposed to trying to keep one specific receiver happy and make sure they're getting their targets.
Yeah, we won't name names, but it felt like there was a lot of that going on a few years ago before they reshuffled the wide receiver room. And the offense has never been the issue. They've certainly been who they have been with Josh Allen. It's been the defense, and they could not have asked for a better restocking of the defense over the last few months since the end of the season. So I think you're exactly right. They are positioned to be the best team in this division. Obviously, best team in the conference, along with the Ravens and the Chiefs, and we'll find out together. Got a long time to do that. So let's take another quick break here. When we come back, we're going to turn our attention to the AFC West, and we'll start it in Las Vegas with the fighting Tom Brady. We'll talk about that right after this. All right, Rand, let's head to the AFC West, specifically the desert. Going to go to Las Vegas. Check out some burning questions for the Las Vegas Raiders. New GM, new head coach, new OC, new quarterback. And a lot of new shiny objects they got in the draft, starting with Ashton Genty. Your burning question, however, it's an interesting one. How involved is Tom Brady, minority owner, going to be in the day-to-day operations? You would imagine he has a relationship with John Spytek. I believe they were both together at Michigan, the GM. He's close with Shedeur Sanders. That never materialized in terms of the quarterback situation. So what are your expectations in terms of how Tom Brady may have already been operating and how he may operate going forward behind the scenes in the front office for Las Vegas?
Well, for one, I'll start with saying I think he's just taken a position of an owner, and I don't think he's just been involved in speculated day-to-day operation. And what he's involved in, I think he has taken a position of an owner, which is coach football and evaluate talent. Day operation, I don't think he's as involved as people may have think.
All right, yeah. So one of the other things to keep in mind here is this defense with Las Vegas, because the Tom Brady angle is an interesting one, and we know about Geno Smith, Ashton Genty. They drafted Jack Besh. They drafted Dante Thornton, all guys who are going to be able to get open. And don't forget Brock Bowers, arguably the best player in the NFL, at least one of the top 5 players based on this rookie season last year, 13th overall pick. But my question is, can this defense be sneaky? Average was the term I used. And by that, I mean, can they hold up long enough that if the Raiders are able to score 28 to 35 points, can they eke out a win? We know about Max Crosby, of course. That's where the conversation starts. One of the most active edge rushers in the NFL. Christian Wilkins will be back off the injury. They signed Devin White, the linebacker, who played for the Buccaneers forever. Landon Roberts comes over from New England, and by way previously of that, who's with the Steelers. He has a relationship with Tom Brady. They signed Jeremy Chin, and they got Eric Stokes, the cornerback, the former first-round pick of the Green Bay Packers. On paper, this defense should look a lot better than it did a year ago. We'll see how it plays out in reality in one of the toughest divisions in football. Patrick Graham's defensive coordinator. He's done a pretty good job there. But I think offensively, they're much fewer concerns than they were a year ago, because it starts with Geno. And then defensively, you got to figure out a way to slow. You're not going to stop Tom Brady. You're not going to stop Patrick Mahomes. You're not going to stop Justin Herbert. You might not even stop Bo Nix, which is a funny thing to say 12 months out now. But if you can just win some of those third downs, get off the field, and allow Geno to get back out there. I think there's an opportunity for this team to be around 500. Rand, what do you think about that? Can this team get to 8 or 9 wins, or is that too much to ask? Are they legitimately a year away, like we were talking about with New England earlier in the show?
Having technical difficulties, so to speak. I think this team is going to be a little bit more well positioned than people think. I believe in Pete. I know what he's capable of. I've been in this division, in the division with him in the NFC West, and saw what he's able to do with rosters that people didn't think were ready to compete. So I think coordinator, which is one of the brightest defensive minds in our game. I think these guys will be takes care of the football.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. I have secretly high hopes that this team's going to be better than we give them credit for. One of the things, I've been a Geno Smith fan for it feels like 3 or 4 years now, and I think he's going to come in and open up that offense, especially with Chip Kelly down up the plays. And I think it's going to look a lot different than what we've seen in recent years, and in a good way. I think Tom Brady's influence, whatever it may end up being, is going to be mostly positive. We'll find out together, but I think this organization, you talk about Pete Carroll, is headed in the right direction, and you got to be excited if you're a Raiders fan for the first time in what feels like a minute. All right, let's go to the Denver Broncos, a team that a year ago everyone was trying to figure out how in the Lord's name you could use a 12 overall pick on Bo Nix. Sean Payton and George Payton know more than we do. Credit to Bo Nix for playing the way he did, and Sean putting him in position to have success. Now you look at this roster, they're not a lot of holes, which is nuts. They drafted Jahdae Barron, who's going to be a starter on day one, whether it's nickel or outside, we'll see. Rand, your burning question for the Denver Broncos. What improvements does Bo Nix need to make in year 2 to help lift Denver? And my follow-up to that was, how do you avoid the sophomore slump? Similar to the question you asked earlier when we were talking about a team earlier today. So how do you put Bo Nix in the best position to have success if you're Sean Payton and not put too much on his plate?
If you go back and you look at who Sean Payton is as a coordinator and what he's done, he's aggressive with the football. And so in some aspects, you want to see Bo Nix be more. And then now, if you look at his numbers that he had, he goes 2-2 in the month of December, and he threw 6 picks during October, where he only threw 1 pick. The team went 3-1. So I just think you just still need to evolve as a passer, get more comfortable, and just continue to be aggressive in spots with the football.
Yeah, and we talked for the longest time about potentially them taking Omarion Hampton, the running back, at pick 20. They ended up going with Jahdae Barron because he fell in their lap. They came back and got R.J. Harvey out of UCF. He's going to be an immediate contributor. They signed Evan Ingram, the tight end from Jacksonville, previously with the Giants, and they're talking about how Sean Payton's going to use him as a move tight end and take advantage of his athleticism. And they drafted Pat Bryant. And Pat Bryant was a pick I didn't love at the time, a third-round pick, because he's 4.61 is what he ran. I didn't thought he played particularly fast, but the Broncos have talked about how they plan on using him. They love the way he plays at the end of games and shows up and makes plays. And while he may be similar in some ways to what Cortland Sutton gives you, you can never have enough big, huge targets for your wide receiver, for your quarterback in Bo Nix. And much the same way we talked about them getting the tall receivers for C.J. Stroud and Jaden Higgins to go along with Nico Collins. So I do understand that, to go along with Marvin Mims and the way that Devon Bailey played in his rookie season last year. Does this team have a chance to threaten the Chiefs, or are we asking a little too much?
I still think you're asking a little bit too much. This is just year. And so they still have a little bit of ways to grow. They still have more questions to answer, and the Chiefs are in their spot. So I think they have a chance to make the playoffs again, but I think there is a way to compete with the Chiefs.
All right, let's take another quick break here, and we'll wrap up the AFC West, talk Chargers and the Chiefs, and we'll talk about those two teams right after this. And you pay your internet bill? You good to go now?
Hey, man, I don't know what's going on. These new subdivisions, they haven't quite wired right.
All right, we got him back. We're back, fellas. All right, good to hear it. No bigger fear than me having to do the final 15 minutes by myself, so I'm glad that you're back to I can bounce some stuff off of because, let's be honest, no one wants to hear me go on for 15 to 20 minutes about what I think is important. Let's start with Los Angeles, the Chargers specifically. And you ask, this is your burning question for the Chargers, how do the Chargers plan to use their 1-2 punch of Najee Harris and first-round pick Amari Hampton? And it feels like what Jim Harbaugh is doing is what we thought he would do when he arrived last year in L.A., take some of the pressure off of Justin Herbert, lean on the run game. They did that last year, and now they've revamped that running back room with two dudes who combined weigh almost 500 pounds. So what's the plan, and how do you make life easier for Justin Herbert?
So for me, it forced me to go back and look at Jim Harbaugh's history with the 49ers from 2011 to 2014. And what he's kind of traditionally had is had that bell cow. Now, last year with the Chargers, they had two guys who go over 100 carries, right? And so you go back and you look at his history in the 49ers. Now, granted, he had a Frank Gore. And in each one of those years that he had a Frank Gore went over 200 carries in the season and kind of led the way. And then I looked at the 2014 season, and that's when they drafted Carlos Hyde in the second round. But then there's the anomaly in there because they had Colin Kaepernick. And so Colin Kaepernick in that time had a lot of carries as well. So I can see them continue to give these guys carries. And I do think by the end of the season, I think Amari Hampton will out-carry Najee Harris, especially because Najee Harris is on a one-year deal.
Yeah, and it feels like it's rare to see two big backs on an NFL roster these days, right? So now we have two guys. Usually have a Fire and Ice or a Knuckles and what'd you call him? Sonic. I always get those two guys confused. And to have two big backs, it makes it quite clear what the plan is going to be. They also have Hassan Haskins, formerly out of Michigan. I don't know what sort of role he'll have. And the other thing I want to point to is they signed Mekhi Becton. So, again, reinforcing the idea that they're going to run the ball. They're going to be tough running the ball. The only real burner they have is Ladd McConkey on the outside. They do have Quentin Johnson, who hasn't quite yet reached his potential. So it feels like, I don't want to call it a possession offense, but it feels like an offense that's predicated on running the ball and then maybe opening things up with play action to create possibilities and opportunities for wide receivers to get open. Does that sound like I'm oversimplifying it? Does that seem like a blueprint they might be trying to work with?
No, I think it's exactly what you said. It's bully ball. You know, you go out and you sign Mekhi Becton to go along with this already massive offensive line, and you allow those offensive linemen, those five guys to come off the bus first, and then you have two, like you said, 230-plus pound running backs coming behind that. They're going to play bully ball. They're going to play possession ball because we know that Kansas City can score quick, right? So we understand that. We know Denver's building an offense that can score quick. And I'm sure the Raiders are going to want to be in that same vein. And the best way for the Chargers to combat that is by slowing the game down, possessing the ball, and being able to score when they get those opportunities. So I think this is what a Jim Harbaugh team is. This is what he built in Michigan to help combat those Ohio State offenses that can score up and down the field. Just slow the game down, play bully ball, and lean on those guys until the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that with the Bills in the last segment, what they were trying to do in terms of following the blueprint of the Eagles and pressuring Patrick Mahomes and get that opportunity. Chiefs are going to see the Chargers will see the Chiefs twice in Patrick Mahomes. And they're getting after it on the defensive line as well. They drafted Jamari Caldwell, the little spark plug from Oregon, and they drafted Kyle Kennard, the edge rusher out of South Carolina, to go along with Tuli Pilotu, who they drafted a few years ago in the second round. Khalil Mack is still there, and as a situational pass rusher probably at this point. But I think the point is that you can get after it. And if you can pressure Patrick Mahomes, that's going to make your life easier. One last thing on the burning question for the Chargers. This was mine. We talked about Trevor Lawrence on Tuesday. This is put up or shut up time in terms of where he is in his journey as a franchise quarterback. Feels like where they were Justin Herbert as well. Is that fair to say?
No, absolutely. I think it is. And when you think about it, and as we were talking about these running backs and what they're doing and what we expect their plan to be, it makes you think, why won't they just turn over the keys to Justin Herbert? You know, what's giving them pause? And we know he's talented and possibly from a physical standpoint, one of the top five most talented guys at the position. But what's giving them pause? and not turning over the keys to him. And so you have to wonder that. But I do agree. I think that it's time for him to take the next step, and let's see if he's really a franchise quarterback like most think he is.
Yeah, it's funny. It felt like they gave him the keys too early when Brandon Staley was there, and then they tried to dial it back maybe a little too much in the first few years of Jim Harbaugh. Maybe they'll find that happy medium. I remember when Phillip Rivers, I'm dating myself here, when Phillip Rivers was drafted, he sat on the bench for a couple years, and then Marty Schottenheimer just ran the ball the entire first 2 years, it felt like, of Phillip Rivers' career, and then things started to open up. And maybe we'll have to find that balance because, to your point, physically, good luck finding someone who can do the things that Justin Herbert can do with that size, with that sort of mobility. One of the guys who can do those things isn't quite as tall, but he's certainly as mobile and does everything else is Patrick Mahomes. So let's head our way to Kansas City here for the final team we'll talk about in terms of burning questions for the AFC West. And my burning question is, if you're every other team in the AFC and you see what the Chiefs have done to get better, how do you get better by that much and then some to have a chance to compete for the conference? And we've sort of talked about that with the Chargers, and we talked about that with the Bills. But every team's looking at the Chiefs thinking, okay, what do we have to do to get better? And some teams have a lot to do, and some teams have a little bit to do. So let's talk about the Raiders, for example, because we know that the Bills are close and the Chargers are relatively close and the Ravens are close. But if you're a team like the Broncos or the Raiders in this division, what's the first thing you need to do to get better? Is that stock the front four, or is there something else you're thinking about?
No, you have to build your team with the thought in mind of the people that you're going to play the most, which is within your division. So how are you going to compete within your division? And this is a copycat league. Once teams can see how to beat a specific team, then they're going to start to build that and incorporate that into their system. And so if you're the Raiders, you have to be able to put a front together that's going to be able to get to Patrick Mahomes and get him on the ground and affect that offense.
All right, we'll find out together. Rand, I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't have your burning question for the Chiefs. I forgot to write it down. What is your burning question for Kansas City?
So my burning question was, is this the final year of this championship window for the Chiefs?
Oh, that's why I didn't write it down, because it sounded so crazy. Okay, go ahead.
And it's hard to say this against an Andy Reid-led team, right? Because he's found at different times how to reimagine this offense and do different things to, just, again, reimagine the offense. Everyone thought they wouldn't do anything without Tyreek Hill, and then here they are again. However, I will jump in the minority and say I think this window for the Chiefs is closing. Because you have some key components on this team. You shake your head, Ryan. I see you shaking your head. But you have Chris Jones that's getting older and still nursing a knee injury. Then you have Travis Kelce entering the final year of his deal, and he is making more money off the field than he is on the field at this point. And so I think that window's closing. Now, again, you look at them reimagining their offense, and you go and you still have Rashee Rice, you have Xavier Worthy, you sign Hollywood Brown. So you have these explosive weapons. But I do think that window for the Chiefs is closing.
All right, before I ask this question, I'll follow up with this one. Which team is most likely to replace the Chiefs in the AFC?
I'd say right now, if I could take two, I would say the way Baltimore is currently built, if they could cash in on this window, because I think their window is probably smaller than the Chiefs, but Baltimore is built to take over, as well as Kansas City. I'm not Kansas City, excuse me, Buffalo.
Hey, let me ask you this question now that you're speaking on it. It feels like both the Ravens and the Bills, they can beat the Chiefs in the regular season. Does something happen, like going to Arrowhead Stadium in January when it's 15 degrees? Does something happen in terms of the way you play? Do you get tight? Do you do the things you didn't do in November, for example, when you were able to win and sometimes make it look relatively easy?
Yeah, and the thing that changes most is, like you said, if it's Buffalo or if it's Baltimore, they play in the same conditions in terms of weather. They're both outdoor teams, and they have cold, frigid weather, so the weather shouldn't be a factor. However, the circumstance changes. In January, it's one and done. right? There's no next week if you lose, and you're playing these teams in the regular season. You lose, you have an opportunity to fix it, and you have another opponent the following week. And then you mix in just overall playoff experience. Like Patrick Mahomes has seen it. He's done it. I go back to our year in San Francisco where the year we played them in the Super Bowl, they overcame large deficits from, I think it was Houston. They were down 24, came back and won that game. And then us in San Francisco in the Super Bowl, we were up 10 with 7 minutes to go. And I think we ended up losing by double-digit points. And so he's seen all these circumstances and scenarios that these other quarterbacks hadn't faced.
Yeah, and it feels like Tom Brady down the stretch when Tom Brady was in his prime getting red hot. There was no lead that was big enough. I mean, again, unfortunately, Kyle Shanahan was OC in Atlanta in that Super Bowl that people still talk about. I'll tell you a story about the San Francisco KC Super Bowl, which was in Miami. This is how much they love me at work. They sent me into the San Francisco locker room to ask questions after the game about what went wrong in that coverage when Tyreek had that catch in that big over. I don't even remember if it was like a third and long or fourth down or whatever it was. Not surprisingly, people didn't want to talk about it, but they sent me down there to see if I could take a beating. I survived. I got out of there, asked my question. Not a lot of happy faces in that locker room, but I think that aura of Patrick Mahomes, whether you want to admit it or not, looms over Arrowhead Stadium in January football. And you want to be the guy that gets on the I'm off the Kansas City train early. I will let you sit first class in that train because I ain't getting on. I ain't getting on just yet. I've seen that movie too many times. We're done with the AFC burning questions. We're going to do the NFC burning questions starting next week. For Rand Carthon, I'm Ryan Wilson. Thanks for joining us on With the First Pick. Check out With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast. Scan that QR code, and we will see you guys next week.